300 homeowners thought my pig farm was the problem. They should have blamed the woman holding the clipboard. They didn't know that one signature, one forgotten document, and one legal corridor buried beneath their million-dollar neighborhood would destroy everything Linda had spent years building. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The smell of fermented corn and fresh hay hit me before sunrise. It was the same smell I had known since I was old enough to walk beside my grandfather through these barns. The deep grunts from hundreds of healthy hogs rolled across the fields like distant thunder. Every sound meant another normal morning on Walker family farms. Then I heard tires crunching across my gravel driveway. Not one SUV. 6 of them. White luxury vehicles lined up outside my main barn like they owned the place. Their polished paint reflected the morning sun while my workers quietly stopped loading feed. Nobody had to say a word. We all knew trouble had arrived. Linda Ashcroft stepped out first. She wore her signature crisp cream-colored blazer, dark oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes, and carried a thick leather clipboard pressed tightly against her chest like a shield. Her smile told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't here to solve a problem. She was here to celebrate one. Behind her stood 2 county inspectors, an HOA attorney, and several board members holding clipboards like they were carrying badges. Linda walked slowly across my yard as if every square foot already belonged to her. She barely glanced at the animals before pinching her nose with dramatic disgust. "This ends today," she said. "Our residents invested millions to live beside peaceful countryside. Not this." She waved one perfectly manicured hand toward my barns as if 60 years of family history could be erased with a simple gesture. One inspector quietly taped an official notice onto the weathered wooden gate that my grandfather built in 1964. Temporary agricultural shutdown. 72 hours to remove all livestock. Failure to comply would trigger escalating penalties. I read every line without saying a single word. Linda seemed disappointed that I wasn't arguing. She probably expected yelling. Maybe threats. Maybe tears. Instead, I folded the notice once and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "That's it?" she asked with a short laugh. "No lawyer. No speech. No fight." I simply nodded. "You'll get exactly what you asked for." Her board members exchanged amused smiles. One of them whispered that country people always gave up once the paperwork arrived. The convoy disappeared down my gravel road, leaving behind nothing but dust and silence. My foreman looked at me and shook his head. "What now, Ethan?" I watched my largest breeding boar stroll lazily across the pasture. He weighed nearly 600 pounds and moved with the slow, heavy confidence of an animal that didn't care about fences, opinions, or property values. I smiled for the first time that morning. "No," I said quietly. "We follow the law." I didn't always understand why my grandfather insisted on keeping every old document. Back then, I thought he was simply sentimental. Years later, I realized he had been preparing me for this exact day. I was born on this farm long before anyone thought the rolling hills outside Austin would become prime real estate. I still remember my grandfather locking the old barn every night. The brass key always made the same heavy metallic click inside the iron lock. He would lean against the weathered timber, smile at the quiet valley, and tell me that land only protects the people willing to protect it first. My father expanded the operation one fence at a time. He taught me that every gate had a purpose. Every pasture rotation mattered. Every animal deserved respect because our reputation depended on how we cared for them. Most mornings started before daylight. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of feed grain drifting through the barns. Dew covered every blade of grass. My boots crunched across the gravel, while 600-pound boars greeted me with impatient grunts that echoed through the valley. Some people hear noise when they visit a farm. I hear routine. I hear responsibility. I hear 3 generations keeping the same promise. Things remained peaceful for decades because there was almost nothing around us except ranches and open fields. Then developers discovered our county. Empty pastures slowly disappeared beneath concrete streets and decorative stone entrances. Luxury homes replaced grazing land. Fancy coffee shops replaced feed stores. Within 5 years, an entirely new neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates appeared right beside our eastern fence line. The sales brochures advertised peaceful country living with modern luxury. They proudly displayed sunsets over rolling farmland, even using photographs of my barns in their marketing material without ever asking permission. Buyers wanted the view of an authentic Texas farm. They simply did not want the farm itself. At first, I welcomed the new neighbors. Whenever families stopped by with curious children, I gave them small tours. I honestly believed we could all live side by side. Then the Homeowners Association elected Linda Ashcroft as president. The atmosphere changed almost overnight. Complaint letters replaced friendly conversations. Rules replaced common sense. Looking back now, patience was probably exactly what Linda wanted me to practice while she laid her trap. Linda never introduced herself with a handshake. She introduced herself with paperwork. Every Tuesday morning, like clockwork, she appeared beside our fence wearing the same cream-colored blazer, dark sunglasses, and carrying the same leather clipboard, looking like she was inspecting a military base instead of a Texas farm. The first envelope arrived less than 3 weeks after she took office. It claimed my delivery trucks created an unpleasant visual experience during morning school traffic. The trucks had used that county road for 30 years. I wrote a polite response offering to shift loading times by 30 minutes as a gesture of good faith. She rejected it within 24 hours. The second complaint focused on noise. According to Linda's clipboard notes, the sound of hogs before sunrise violated community tranquility. The county agricultural office confirmed our operation was fully protected under Texas right to farm laws. Linda ignored the county's letter completely. Then came the smell. She stood at the microphone during an HOA meeting holding a scented candle as if it were physical evidence in a murder trial. She claimed families could not enjoy breakfast on their patios because of my barns. When an elderly homeowner reminded everyone the farm predated the subdivision by half a century, Linda smiled politely, adjusted her sunglasses, and talked over him. Every week another issue appeared on her clipboard. Flies. Dust. Tractor headlights before dawn. She even claimed my grandfather's windmill lowered property values because it looked too industrial. One afternoon I noticed her luxury SUV parked beside the eastern fence line. Linda sat inside with binoculars resting on her dashboard, taking notes on her leather clipboard. When I walked toward the fence, she calmly started the engine and drove off without saying a word. A month later, she hired environmental consultants to test our drainage. Water quality passed. Soil samples met every standard. Instead of accepting the results, she organized online petitions and convinced local reporters to film frustrated homeowners standing beside clean sidewalks, pointing dramatically toward my distant barns. Then she held a community appreciation picnic directly against my eastern property line. Loud music played while a giant banner read, "Bringing beauty back to Willow Creek." Every few minutes Linda pointed toward my barns while speaking to television cameras. That was the moment I realized this had never been about noise or smell. Linda wasn't trying to solve a neighborhood problem. She was trying to erase a farm that refused to fit into her sales brochure. The pressure soon spread beyond letters and news cameras. One Monday morning, my largest restaurant client called. The manager explained that online review sites had been flooded with hundreds of negative one-star ratings from Willow Creek residents accusing them of supporting cruel and illegal farming. The owner knew it was false, but he couldn't survive the public relations damage. He canceled our weekly orders. That single phone call wiped out 30% of our direct monthly cash flow. Before lunch, my bank manager called. He had financed our equipment for 20 years. And I had never heard concern in his voice before. "Ethan," he said quietly, "your operating line is still safe for now. But if this conflict keeps snowballing and revenue drops further, underwriting is going to start asking hard questions." The weight inside my chest doubled. That afternoon, as I walked through the office, I noticed something missing from the bulletin board. My office administrator, Maria, had quietly removed her annual family vacation request. She thought I wouldn't notice. She was trying to save the farm a few $100s because she knew cash was tight. Seeing that empty spot on the corkboard hurt more than any letter from Linda. These people relied on me to protect their livelihoods just as my father had protected theirs. Linda sensed the tightening squeeze and escalated. She convinced the HOA to hire aggressive attorneys who sent formal demands weekly. They alleged our trucks damaged roads, our harvesters kicked up illegal dust, and even claimed migrating birds landing in our retention ponds created sanitation hazards for nearby swimming pools. At a crowded county commission meeting, Linda stood at the podium in her white blazer, holding a thick binder. She argued that modern luxury development deserved priority over outdated agricultural operations, requesting an immediate emergency suspension of our operating permits. When my turn came, I walked to the microphone carrying only a single manila folder containing 60 years of flawless inspection reports. I placed them on the table, thanked the board, and sat back down. Linda smiled at her board members as if I had surrendered. She mistook my brevity for defeat. She had no idea I was quietly cataloging every single mistake she made. I spent the next 3 days doing something that completely confused everyone around me. I stopped arguing. I stopped attending public hearings. I stopped responding to Linda's endless accusations. Instead, I focused entirely on the farm. The feed trucks arrived on schedule. The barns stayed spotless. Every invoice was paid. Every employee received their paycheck exactly on time. Caleb cornered me outside the equipment shed one evening, looking toward the eastern fence where Linda's white SUV sat idling under the streetlights. "Are we really giving up, Ethan?" he asked softly. I took a slow sip of coffee from my father's dented metal mug. "No, Caleb. We're giving them exactly what they expect to see." His brow furrowed for a second before realization lit up his eyes. A slow grin spread across his face. The next morning I called a livestock auction service and requested an appraisal of our breeding herd. Within 24 hours, word leaked across the county that Walker Family Farms might be liquidating. Local ranchers called. Equipment dealers called. I neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. I simply thanked them for their concern. Linda heard the gossip by Friday. She drove past our gate twice, not even bothering to hide her satisfaction. She actually rolled down her window and waved her clipboard at me with a triumphant smile. 2 days later, the Willow Creek Estates newsletter was delivered. The front page hailed a major victory for community quality of life, praising Linda's board for protecting property values. It dropped hints about exciting new expansion opportunities on neighboring land. By the weekend, the HOA threw a celebration party near their clubhouse. Caterers set up white tents while real estate agents handed out promotional maps of future expansion. From across the road, I recognized the map. My eastern pastures were shaded in soft green and labeled Future Community Recreational Park. Nobody had ever made an offer on my land. Nobody had spoken to me. They had simply convinced themselves that a farmer could be pushed around until he broke. Meanwhile, I quietly instructed my crew to service our heavy livestock trailers, double-check every loading gate, and verify all health certificates. Linda drove past one last time, wearing that same victorious smile. "I knew you'd make the practical decision," she called out. "Progress always wins." I nodded politely. "You're right about one thing. Things are about to change." Early the next morning, I unlocked the old filing cabinet in the farmhouse office. The brass key turned with a heavy metallic click. The drawers smelled faintly of aged paper, cedar, and old ink. My grandfather kept everything. Every land grant, every survey map, every county deed dating back to the 1950s. For 30 minutes, my attorney, Daniel Brooks, and I sifted through yellowed pages of property records. We traced boundary lines drawn in India ink, reading through forgotten clauses and county filings. Deep within the bottom drawer sat a thick leather binder. On the cover, embossed in faded gold lettering, were the words, Walker Agricultural Holdings. To the public, I was just Ethan Walker, a stubborn farmer struggling to keep a hereditary pig farm afloat. What Linda and her board never realized was that over the last 20 years, my family had quietly built an agricultural infrastructure empire. Walker Agricultural Holdings owned commercial feed mills, regional grain silos, and a major livestock transportation logistics fleet operating across central Texas. Now, Walker Agricultural Holdings owned valuable land and infrastructure, but almost every single dollar stayed tied up inside long-term agricultural assets. The family farm still depended on weekly fresh meat contracts to keep daily cash moving, which was why Linda's smear campaign had hurt our immediate bank credit. But in terms of legal power and property rights, we held all the cards. Daniel pulled a massive, fold-out county survey map from the binder and laid it across the wooden table. Bold red ink lines cut straight across the county, leading directly through the middle of what was now Willow Creek Estates. "There it is," Daniel said, pointing to an official county seal. "Permanent commercial livestock access easement. Recorded in 1958. Renewed without interruption every decade." Long before luxury homes were built, ranchers moved massive herds through that dedicated path. When developers bought the surrounding land, they signed deeds acknowledging the active easement. They simply paved over it with winding asphalt roads, manicured medians, and million-dollar lawns, assuming no farmer would ever enforce it. Daniel drafted a single, formal legal notice. It didn't demand money or make threats. It simply notified the HOA and county authorities that Walker family farms would resume routine, full-scale livestock transfers through the established legal corridor starting Tuesday morning. I locked the cabinet, put the brass key back in my pocket, and looked out toward the subdivision. Linda thought power came from holding a clipboard and shouting at board meetings. My grandfather taught me that real power sits quietly in an old filing cabinet, waiting for the right day to be opened. The certified notices hit Willow Creek Estates on Tuesday morning. Linda immediately issued an emergency community blast calling the document a desperate, baseless bluff. She scheduled an urgent board meeting for that evening. However, the county attorney attended the meeting as well. One resident later told me the room went dead silent when the county attorney stood up, projected the 1958 deed onto the wall, and stated flatly that the agricultural easement was absolute, active, and fully enforceable by law. By 7:30 a.m. the next day, county sheriff deputies arrived at the entrance of Willow Creek Estates. Their role wasn't to take sides, it was to direct traffic and ensure public safety during a lawful livestock movement. They set up orange warning cones along the paved neighborhood streets that overlapped the historic corridor. Residents gathered on their manicured lawns in bathrobes and workout clothes, staring in complete shock. A frantic homeowner ran up to the lead deputy, pointing at her pristine lawn. "Can they actually do this on our streets?" she shouted. The deputy didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Yes, ma'am. The livestock easement was recorded decades before your neighborhood existed. These aren't just your streets. This is an active agricultural route." Moments later, Linda arrived in her white blazer, marching furiously toward the deputies with her leather clipboard raised. "I demand you halt this harassment immediately. We are filing an injunction." The deputy politely looked at her paperwork, handed it back, and pointed to the county seal on his authorization folder. "Everything here is state-approved, Ms. Ashcroft. Step back behind the cones." The heavy iron latch on our main barn gate clicked open. Caleb and our handlers stepped forward, guiding our massive breeding boars and cattle down the gravel driveway and straight onto the pristine asphalt of Willow Creek Estates. 600-pound animals moved at a slow, deliberate pace, their hooves clacking heavily against the smooth pavement. Linda stood frozen near the subdivision's marble entrance monument. Her confident smile was completely gone. For the first time, she realized the farmer she tried to destroy hadn't been cowering in the dark. He had just been waiting for the law to do its job. Livestock moving through a corridor do not care about expensive landscaping. They follow paths. As hundreds of animals moved methodically along the designated legal easement, reality crashed down on Willow Creek Estates. 600-pound boars stepped onto lush, over-watered turf lawns. Sections of prize-winning Bermuda grass rolled up like old carpet under heavy hooves. High and decorative flower beds were trampled into thick mud. Dozens of automatic sprinkler heads cracked beneath the weight, sending fountains of water spraying into the air like geysers. A homeowner named Marcus ran outside in his bathrobe, waving his arms hysterically as a giant boar casually trotted across his custom stone driveway. "Who approved this?" he screamed at a passing deputy. "Who authorized a stampede through a residential zone?" The deputy didn't even slow down. "Your developer did in 1958, sir. And your HOA president was served official notice 3 days ago." Down the street, Mrs. Higgins stood paralyzed on her porch, watching her award-winning Japanese garden get flattened into brown sludge. She was already on speakerphone with her insurance adjuster, her voice shaking violently. "What do you mean it's not covered?" The adjuster's tone was dry and final. "Mrs. Higgins, Section 4B of your homeowner policy explicitly excludes damages resulting from recorded municipal easements. Your HOA was legally notified of this corridor. The claim is officially denied." She dropped her phone into the mud and sank onto her front steps, weeping openly. By noon, 3 commercial landscaping contractors were standing at the neighborhood entrance, scribbling figures on notepad paper. One of them handed a preliminary assessment to an HOA board member whose face had gone completely white. To replace the crushed irrigation lines, regrade the soil, and lay custom sod across 40 properties. You're looking at $85,000 minimum per sector. And we need cash up front, because your insurance carrier isn't backing this. Panicked board members turned to the HOA's legal counsel, practically begging for a legal loophole. "Can't we sue the farmer for property destruction?" The lawyer shook his head slowly, looking exhausted. "On what grounds?" He stayed strictly within his recorded 1958 easement, complied with every county safety order, and gave proper written notice. "If we file a frivolous suit, he'll countersue for legal harassment, and considering his logistics company owns half the transport fleets in the county, he has the capital to drag us through court until this entire HOA is bankrupted." Linda stood near the curb, completely isolated. The crispness of her white blazer was gone, stained with road dust and splash marks from broken sprinklers. Her hair was windblown, and her dark sunglasses sat crookedly on her face. Her hands hung limp at her sides. For the first time since she had started her war on Walker Family Farms, the leather clipboard slipped from her grip, hitting the muddy grass with a wet thud. She didn't even bother to pick it up. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting wasn't held in an orderly conference room. It was a riot inside the neighborhood clubhouse. Over 200 homeowners packed the room, waving unpaid repair bills, insurance denial letters, and canceled home purchase agreements. Linda sat at the head table, but the wireless microphone had been taken from her. She looked smaller, stripped of her authority, staring blankly at the sea of furious faces. A resident named Tom stood up, slamming a letter onto the microphone stand. "You told us the farm was an illegal nuisance. You swore to us at the spring picnic that your legal team was going to make that farm disappear. My home sale collapsed this morning because the buyer's title company flagged the active livestock easement." Linda swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. I acted in good faith to protect our community's aesthetic standards." "Good faith?" Another resident shouted from the back, pointing a finger at her. "My life savings are tied up in this house. The real estate agent told me our property values dropped 25% today because of uninsurable liabilities. My swimming pool pump is destroyed by runoff mud," a woman yelled from the front row. "You didn't protect us, Linda. You dragged this entire neighborhood into your personal crusade against a farm that was here 50 years before your house was even built." Screams for her immediate resignation filled the hall. Cries of "Resign! Resign!" echoed off the high ceilings. Linda looked to her left and right, searching for support from the board members who had once smiled and nodded alongside her. Every single one of them shifted their chairs away from her, looking down at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak one last time, but no sound came out. The absolute silence of her defeat was deafening. A homeowner near the front microphone looked at her with pure coldness and said softly, You were right about one thing when you walked onto that farm, Linda. He paused, letting the heavy silence hang over the room. It did end today. By the end of the month, the fallout was complete. Linda Ashcroft didn't make a grand public statement. A moving truck quietly pulled into her driveway before dawn on a rainy Thursday. A deep discount for sale sign was driven into her front lawn. She walked out of her house wearing plain clothes, quietly unscrewed the HOA President brass plate from her mailbox, and threw it directly into the trash bin before driving away forever. On the table in the abandoned clubhouse, left behind in the middle of a littered conference room, sat her thick leather clipboard, unclaimed, unneeded, and completely forgotten. The remaining HOA board dissolved, and a new, pragmatic group of residents took over. Their very first official act wasn't issuing a legal threat, it was sending a handwritten note, requesting a quiet meeting at my farmhouse. We sat around my grandfather's old wooden table over fresh coffee. Together with our attorneys, we signed a permanent, legally binding harmony agreement. Willow Creek Estates rewrote its covenants to include mandatory disclosure packets for every future buyer, clearly mapping the historical 1958 agricultural corridor. The following autumn, the new HOA president asked if Walker Family Farms would host an annual farm day for neighborhood families. I agreed. When the event arrived, the same fields that had been a battleground were filled with the sounds of children laughing. Families walked through our barns, learning about heritage farming, while kids fed carrots to piglets through the wooden fences. A homeowner who had lived 3 doors down from Linda walked up to me beside the main barn gate, holding his young daughter's hand. He looked around at the open fields, then back at me with a quiet, genuine nod. Ethan, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We should have listened to the history instead of the speeches. I smiled softly and shook his hand. The land has a way of teaching everyone eventually. Business returned stronger than ever. Our restaurant client called back, offering a long-term contract for double our original weekly delivery orders because their customers had demanded our pork back. Our bank line of credit was fully restored without question. And on Monday morning, when I walked past the office bulletin board, I smiled. Maria's annual family vacation request was right back on the corkboard, pinned proudly right in the center where it belonged. As the sun began to set over the Texas hills, I took a quiet walk along our eastern fence line. The neighborhood streets were quiet, the lawns had been repaired, and the polished marble entrance sign glistened under the warm streetlights. I looked at the subdivision, then down at the old brass key resting in my palm. I thought about Linda waving at me from her SUV, telling me that progress always wins. I smiled to myself and whispered into the quiet evening air. Progress did win, Linda. Just not the kind you expected. My grandfather used to say that the land remembers every signature. He was right. The people changed. The houses changed. Even the board changed. But the truth stayed exactly where it had always been. Real strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest or holding a clipboard. It comes from standing firm, respecting the law, and knowing that time always favors the patient.